All right. I think we'll go ahead and get started. It's now 11:01, and I see our participants coming in. Perfect. All right. Well, good morning and welcome everyone to our Summer 3 Aware Real World Data and Real World Evidence webinar of 2025. I'm the host, Amelia Hufford. I'm the SVP of Clinical and Regulatory Science at 3 Aware. Briefly, 3Aware is a medical device-focused data provider and analysis platform that provides device-specific, structured, and unstructured electronic health record data, which includes clinical notes, imaging, patient-reported outcomes data, etc., to the MedTech community. In addition, 3Aware recognizes the wealth of information on medical products that exists and is collected during routine care. And we want to promote the discussion within the global MedTech community on what can be gained from tapping into real-world data sources. And from the regulatory perspective, what are the guidelines, expectations, requirements for the use of such data in generating clinical evidence. So in addition to hosting webinars such as this, 3Aware also holds in-person symposia. The next will be in November, which will be held in Dallas, Fort Worth. And we're going to be sharing information about that event and future webinars on our social accounts, as well as our website, which is 3aware.ai. Before I welcome our guest today, I do have a few housekeeping items. During today's webinar, please submit any questions you may have through the chat function of Zoom. You should have that available at the bottom ribbon of the Zoom menu. Backstage, 3Aware is actually going to be gathering questions for us to address at the end of our discussion, and we hope to allow for 10 minutes to do just that. In addition, we'll be making the recording available to all registrants, and others can also visit the same registration link in the future to receive the recording link. So if you believe others that weren't able to join today might be interested in today's content, please feel free to share the registration link with them. So finally, I am very excited to introduce our guest, Dr. Jill Dreyfus. She has over 25 years of experience in epidemiological research, including real-world evidence generation for both the medical device and the pharmaceutical industries. She has worked on safety studies, regulatory reporting, health outcomes, cost and burden of disease research at a variety of organizations, including Pfizer, Premier, Avalere Health, Inovalon, and Decision Resources, which is now Clarivate. In her current role at Nest, she brings together stakeholders across the medical device ecosystem, including data vendors, research partners, manufacturers, and FDA. She leads strategic initiatives aimed at improving the availability, quality, and methodological rigor of real-world data for regulatory use. This work is intended to help the MedTech community generate more reliable, fit-for-purpose real-world evidence to support innovation for patient care. So thank you, Jill, so much for taking the time to share your insights today. And I wonder if we could start by you sharing some information regarding Nest and what you're currently focused on there.
Great. Well, first, thank you, Amelia, and to the 3Aware team for the nice warm welcome and for the invitation to this discussion today, as well as to those out there taking the time to join the webinar. So before I get started, as you said, I'd like to introduce NEST for those who may not be familiar with our organization. So NEST stands for the National Evaluation System for Health Technology. We're a nonprofit based in Washington, D.C., and we're established in 2016 with funding from FDA through the Medical Device User Fee and Modernization Act, or MDUFA. So we operate under our parent organization, MDIC, which is a public-private partnership focused on advancing patient access to innovative medical technologies. Our mission is to support the sustainable generation and use of real-world evidence for medical devices And we do this by building strong partnerships with representation from stakeholders across the ecosystem. And ultimately, the work at NEST is about improving patient outcomes and decision-making for our stakeholders. So I'll hand it back over to you, Amelia. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you so much, Jill. And before we get started, one of the things that we did last time and I'd like to repeat today is just level set on the definitions of real world data and real world evidence. We use the FDA definition per current guidance, and we've noticed that that definition is also being utilized globally as well. Real-world data, according to the guidance, are data related to patient health status and the delivery of healthcare that is routinely collected, emphasis on routinely collected. Um, Common sources of real-world data include electronic health record data, medical claims data, registry data, and digital technology data. Real-world evidence is the clinical evidence that is regarding the usage and the risks and benefits of a medical product based on the analysis of real-world data. So today's presentation, we're focused on what challenges manufacturers face in translating real-world data to real-world evidence. So Jill and I, we had the pleasure, we were able to meet before and brainstorm and discuss. And the challenges that we kind of bulleted here kind of boil down to data quality, device identification, long-term follow-up, continuity of care, and relevant procedure data. And so, Jill, I wonder, do you have, do you see these as, any of these as maybe more common with manufacturers, or are you noticing the manufacturers, see kind of a variety of challenges?
Yeah, so I'd say all of these are challenges that we hear. Of course, data quality is foundational for generating real-world evidence, and it's one of the primary challenges that we hear. Poor data quality can lead to biased results and regulatory setbacks. So really demonstrating and documenting data quality in submissions is important. But also, really focusing on one of the most common issues is missing data. And key variables like lab or imaging results and even mortality can be missing or incomplete. So that's definitely an area where we hear and see some challenges. But in addition, of course, device identification is step one, and being able to reliably identify the device and real-world data and some of the challenges with that. I know maybe we could talk a little bit more about that, but certainly all of these are challenges that we hear and we've seen in our experience at NEST.
Yeah, no, that I think it's not a long list, but it's a dense list.
Mhm.
And I wonder, what is NEST doing to help address these real world evidence challenges for manufacturers?
Yeah, so I know we're talking about several of the challenges, but we're really focused on the solutions and what we can do to address these challenges. And so we're working in a few different areas. One is with our data quality and research methods frameworks that do address those list of challenges that you had on the previous slide, as well as our NEST mark, where we're focusing currently on real world data quality. So our data mark, as well as we have a real world data marketplace that supports the initiatives at NEST. So I can dig a little bit more into those unless you have something to add, Amelia, to any of this.
No, I think this is good. And I was excited to kind of pull up this slide
Mhm.
specifically on the NEST frameworks. If you could walk us through those.
Sure. So at NEST, we have two frameworks, and you can see those there, the data quality and research methods. And these are the result of a collaborative work by a number of real-world experts across the NEST community. These experts included our health systems, network collaborators, manufacturers, and FDA. And they really have the goal to support the development of high-quality real-world studies for medical devices. The original versions of the frameworks came out in 2020, and they utilized members' knowledge and built on existing work from initiatives such as PCORnet, Sentinel, and MD EpiNet. And then more recently, these subcommittees reconvened to work on updated frameworks. And these updated frameworks really reflect some of the lessons learned by NEST and the medical device real-world evidence community and some of the evolving best practices. We released new versions of these frameworks earlier this year for public comment, which closed in April, but we received some really great feedback. And so thank you to anyone out there who provided comments to us. And we're actively working to incorporate these comments and then release the final versions later this year. So what's new in these frameworks? They really reflect the evolution in real-world evidence innovation in recent years. And for our data quality framework, we're covering a broader range of data sources for quality assessment. The original version focused more on EHR data, but now we're covering a broader range of those sources. They consider some of the more recent RWD guidance documents, and then they also offer some additional examples and best practices. So that's our data quality framework. And then our research methods framework applies to all different types of real-world data sources and is organized around the components of a study protocol for the evaluation specifically of medical devices. And there's two key principles that are included. And the first one is pre-specification of the study design to avoid the fact or appearance of cherry picking your design decisions or selective data mining. And then secondly, there's close attention to potential confounders and how they can be addressed in the study design. And so for those who are interested in seeing either our original frameworks or the updated frameworks, again, that are still draft, they're available on our website, which is NESTcc.org. So again, we'll be coming out later this year with the final versions of those frameworks. So that's our first initiative and has been ongoing for a few years.
Yeah, yeah. And actually, if you don't mind, I have a question about the frameworks. Specifically, how are they meant to align with FDA guidance? And do we defer to one if there happens to be misalignment in a particular study design?
Yeah, so we'll always defer to the FDA guidance as the source, but these are really built with more detail. So we have the guidance documents from 2017 and then the draft 2023 guidance from FDA CDRH. But these frameworks get into a lot more detail about data quality, research methods. And so again, really relying on the FDA guidance documents first and foremost, but also bringing in experiences from some of those other guidances that are out there in the community, as well as our research partners and experts on our subcommittee.
Excellent. Well, I'm going to go ahead and then transition to the next slide on the data mark review.
Yeah, so this is another initiative we've been working on for about the last year and a half or so. And what it is this is a structured review for evaluating the reliability and relevance criteria for real-world data that's intended for regulatory purposes. And so this has been developed again with the FDA guidance documents as the basis, and then the shared NEST stakeholder experiences and expertise. I do want to note that this initiative is evolving with our stakeholders, and we're currently piloting this process in what we call implementation cases. And those cases are projects that we're working closely with manufacturers, research partners, and FDA. And I'll describe this a little bit more in a little more detail later. And so the reason we developed the NESTmark review is that we know manufacturers already use the FDA guidance documents for their studies. However, through the NEST experiences and in discussions with our stakeholders, we really heard a need for predictability and consistency in using real-world evidence for regulatory submissions. So, and to address those challenges that some of those challenges that were on that first slide. So, this data mark approach really helps to evaluate some of the key data quality elements in a structured fashion, and it aims to help reduce some of that uncertainty associated with using real-world data for regulatory filings. So we've worked with experts in the field of RWE, our own experience with test and implementation cases over the past few years, and with experts have developed some detailed tools or questionnaires to really look into and gather information about those key data elements for reliability on the data nest mark side. And then as well, we have review instructions. So for someone who's reviewing those tools and questionnaires, there's some detailed instructions on how to do that. And again, these are rooted in the guidance documents, our frameworks, and then experience with our collaborations with FDA. They're also really reflective of the evolution at NEST. So I mentioned in 2016 when we were founded, and under the first MDUFA 4 funding cycle, there were 21 NEST test cases that were conducted, and there were 2 objectives on those. And those were really to explore the feasibility of working with real-world data in our initial set of network collaborators, and also to identify some areas that NEST could play a role. And those are summarized in a peer-reviewed publication that came out late last year. So actually, it was about a year ago, in August of 2024, in the Journal of Comparative Effectiveness Research. So if you're interested in learning more about those test cases and some of the lessons from those, you can find that peer-reviewed publication, and also on our website. There's some videos and other information about those. And then we've been working through these, what we call implementation cases. And so we have had 2 submissions so far. And as we were developing this process earlier on, it was built on experience with 1 clearance and 1 approval. And we've got 4 ongoing projects. So those are really helping to inform this NEST mark process that we've been working through. And of course, then our expertise. This provider mark is designed to be agnostic to a research question. So we can take some of the quality aspects of data in a study agnostic way, and then learn about data quality early on for either a project or as a head start for other projects that can be used later for that data source. So the idea here is that we're really looking at certain aspects of quality. And then once that's evaluated, the idea is that those parts may not need to be evaluated again unless things change, and then over time may be updated. But this evaluation ultimately leads to what we call a NEST mark review report, and data vendors can use that as part of their marketing and evidence of data quality and discussions with manufacturers. And then it can also be included as part of a regulatory submission, so that documentation that I mentioned early on about data quality. So I'll just pause there in case, you want to have any questions or want to talk through any of this.
And that's actually a question, I had with the NEST data mark. Is it project specific? Is it data partner specific? And I understand, I think we understand that relevance, right, is something that is going to have to be assessed for each study. It's very study specific. It sounds like, if I'm not mistaken, data reliability, for the most part, once a source of data is chosen, then that is less study specific, more study agnostic. But will every project have a data mark review?
So currently in our implementation projects, we are intending to do a data mark review for those projects. But to your question of that balance between what can be looked at separate from a study, and then the aspects that need to be looked at that would be part of a study, so that relevancy piece of the reliability and relevance, that's one area that we've been working really hard to distinguish. And what we're doing with the data provider mark is really looking at things such as data accuracy, provenance, governance, ETL, patient privacy. So all those things that you can look at in a data source that would be agnostic to the regulatory objective or the research question. And so really getting a head start for projects, and then that information can additionally be reused for other projects. But recognizing what you said on the relevance side, that's really where we dig further into a study design evaluation. And we've been working on that with our implementation projects. But as we know, every project is unique. Every project is going to have different aspects of the design evaluation that will need to be considered depending on all sorts of mainly the regulatory objectives. So there, we do have a tool to walk through some of the evaluation, again, based on the relevance criteria from the FDA guidance documents, but also recognizing that once we have a project, we will need to revisit aspects of that data source evaluation that may be specific. So things like continuity of care, longitudinality, timeliness, and representativeness. Some of that can be looked at up front, but once we have a study question, of course, we're going to have to go back and really look at that in the context of what the regulatory objective is. So we are working through that as well. So more of both the reliability aspects and then the relevance aspects.
Excellent. Thank you.
Sure.
Okay. Well, I believe the next slide takes a look into the three-aware approach for addressing the real-world evidence challenges. But Jill, before I take over, I didn't know if you had any additional pieces you wanted to expand on or
Yeah,
any.
I just wanted to thank you for, that moment. So I just wanted to pause and just
Yeah,
mention that I mentioned a few times these implementation projects. So those are really where we're working with manufacturers and FDA to inform the development of this process and then providing experiential learning for NEST. And those implementation projects are things that will have high patient impact, a topic of opportunity for collaboration, and then multi-manufacturer broad impact across the ecosystem. So there's the implementation project initiative. And then to support all the work that we're doing, we also have what we call the RWE Marketplace Initiative.
right.
And here is where I know, we've been working with you, Amelia, and 3Aware on this journey with us and continuing discussions on how we can work together. But here, this is a marketplace of both institutional and commercial data and service provider organizations. So we've really developed this marketplace to help NEST scale the work and provide a marketplace of partners that have the potential to support RWE and regulatory needs of manufacturers. So I just wanted to make sure to mention that, and all of this information is available on our website for those who might want to learn more about the marketplace or about our implementation cases for manufacturers. And then, I also want to put a plug in that we have a LinkedIn page that you can follow for any new initiatives that might be coming up at our organization. So yeah, thanks for letting me add on those two pieces of information as well.
Of course, and I think that's a great segue to my slide. I did want to remind folks, it looks like we've got some questions coming in, but if you're thinking of any questions, we're going to leave some time at the end for myself and Jill to address. Go ahead and add those via the Q&A chat function within the Zoom app. All right, so what is 3Aware doing to address real-world evidence challenges? Before real-world data can even be collected, we have had many manufacturers, in previous studies looking at and utilizing real-world data, they've been stuck on identifying the use of their specific projects or products rather, specifically if they're trying to get down to the version or model number of the device or the UDI. Data sets may not be organized in that way, or sometimes they're organized in, oops, sorry about that. Sometimes they're organized in ways that would be able to possibly link patients to device name. But then those sources have been later found to potentially inaccurately link patient usage to device because the source that they're pulled from within hospital systems aren't always immediately updated if purchasing switches brands. So all that to say, device identification and linkage to patients is a significant challenge, and it's quite a non-starter when trying to design a real-world data study. We definitely recognize the work that the NEST committees have played in pushing toward greater UDI adoption. So we know that manufacturers do have unique device identification on the devices and on the levels of packaging, but there's not necessarily a push within health systems to collect that data. And so the UDI adoption playbook, I think it's playbook for health systems and UDI implementation at the point of care. That connection, which has been adopted by some health systems like Mercy Health, that really makes this possible for researchers. 3Aware has been able to expand beyond point of care UDI implementation, and in partnership with health systems, we've been able to triangulate via multiple again systems within the network, linking device ID to patient records. But that model is currently bespoke for each health system. So 3Aware, we're definitely advocates to the implementation and capturing of UDI at the point of care. Relevance and reliability, I think, Jill, you talked about it. This is something that 3Aware does similarly, it sounds like, to Nest, in that first of all, we assess data reliability when we partner with our data sources. And I just, really want to point to FDA's current draft guidance for information regarding the current thinking and expectations for how to even start to assess. But with regards to relevance, 3Aware will work with our clients, our manufacturers, and identify what are your study outcomes, what are the data elements that you're wanting to assess, what is your time period? Are we going to be looking at just procedure data, or do we want to follow that patient's journey over time out maybe, months to years post-procedure? And in doing so, for each study, we go into our data and we line by line look for each of the data elements. We assess the longitudinality. We look for sometimes, a study might want to incorporate, for instance, patient-reported outcome measure. And, initially we thought, well, those might not necessarily be part of routine care. They may not be captured in an electronic health record. But more and more, we are seeing that patient-reported outcome measures are captured, especially in the orthopedic space, but even beyond that. So we will do that step-by-step assessment of relevance with regard to the data meeting the study needs. Yeah, again, I just, I can't state enough how important this is, both in helping de-risk the success of the study, but also in future in the write-up of the study report, and especially depending on the usage of the data, it's absolutely necessary. Unstructured data. So this is something that we at 3Aware provide access to. A lot of the data elements aren't necessarily captured in structured tables, aren't necessarily part of common data models. And quite frankly, there's a lot of important detail regarding the device performance within clinical notes. And so 3Aware provides access to clinical notes. And in doing so, we also have to ensure that patient privacy is of the utmost importance. And so how the unstructured notes are anonymized is a big piece of data reliability for us, as well as what is the risk of re-identification. So all of the data sources that we utilize We have undergone an approved anonymization and then expert determination, which evaluates the risk of re-identification. So it's an important step in being able to provide that level of detail to our clients. And then finally, sustainability. So when you're looking at the total product life cycle and you're thinking about your clinical evidence strategy throughout the various phases of the products, managing the timelines, managing the costs are going to be important. And so that's really where I think a strength of real world data is there and can serve the MedTech community. We work with our clients to do that, to find a sustainable approach for this data collection, and but not compromise on data quality. Another thing that we do, and we'll probably end on this before we get into some further discussion and look at some of our questions coming through. But another thing that's very important to 3Aware is collaboration through, we call it collaborative thought leadership. But essentially, our foundation is that we're all in this together. This is a really interesting and innovative approach to clinical evidence gathering, and we're having now access to data that we didn't necessarily have 10 years ago. And we need to come up with what are the best practices in this space. We talk about convergent forums. Basically, this is what we mean by that is, shared dialogue in the form of, webinars such as this, and symposia, and the work that NEST's doing and bringing together manufacturers and regulators. We want the community, which includes the manufacturers, the regulators, the advocacy groups, the data providers. We want them talking, and we want everyone to share information and their expertise and providing methods that folks can follow to essentially gather this high quality data and high quality evidence to move the needle forward. So with that, Jill, I didn't know, we've got some questions come through, but any thoughts, any additional comments you wanted to make?
Yeah, no, just to add on to what you were just saying. Yeah, that's a common goal, the collaboration and bringing together the various stakeholders to really discuss how do we overcome some of the challenges with real world data. We know the ones that we described, but each of us are trying to figure this out along the way. So really coming together with different experts and dialoguing and talking through how we can provide solutions is really exactly where Nest sits as well. So yeah, thank you again for this opportunity to talk about some of these challenges and how folks are working on the solutions.
Thank you so much, Jill. We really appreciate your time. And I will go ahead and start with our first question. So we have a question here. What is the current standard to ensure appropriate device identification in real-world data for non-implantable medical devices? Are EMR physician notes acceptable? I'm assuming reference to the device name. Are those acceptable to identify devices using NLP? Any thoughts from your end, Jill?
Yeah, I know that that's a challenge. In previous roles that I've had, when we have something such as this, a question such as this, really looking to see if there are, pieces of the device or any clues in the data that we might be able to look at to identify if to tie the patient to a device. But yeah, agree that is a challenge, especially with structured data. So maybe Amelia, if you want to talk to some of this is what might be available in physician notes, that
Yes.
would be helpful with, yeah.
Yeah, no, this is a great question. And I've even prior to 3Aware, this was an approach we took. It's somewhat limited if the device, unless the device is referenced by specifically by brand name. So if it's something like Kleenex, right, where it maybe its name is utilized, but it's not necessarily specific to a particular brand or manufacturer. It makes it difficult. It also a lot of times when we read the notes, they don't necessarily say much detail other than the X guide wire. Now we do see some reference. There might be reference to an Ansel modification. I see that, as an example. But that might narrow what it could be, but it doesn't necessarily, it could still be representative of a host of various configurations. So it really depends on the device. We have had projects where they have been successful in doing that. It was a unique name. It's referenced by the clinicians, and it's kind of there's not a lot of other devices utilized in this space. So I think with all things regulatory, the answer is it depends. Um, and that's where really having that linkage to something more tangible, such as a version model number or UDI, would I think be a better approach across the board, but not to say that this isn't possible. All right. I did see Phil put in the chat function the link to the LinkedIn pages that we requested. So thank you so much, Phil, for doing that in the website chat. A next question here. What trends is NEST seeing from FDA reviewers around the use of unstructured data, NLP-derived insights, or long-term follow-up in real-world evidence submissions?
Yeah, I mean, I'd say that this goes back always to the reliability and documentation, right? So if we're using unstructured data, just really being very clear of the provenance of the data, how is the unstructured data being analyzed, especially for NLP, making sure that we really understand what the algorithms are. Are we able to identify in the notes that it's not a rule out, for example, of an outcome versus identifying the outcome. So really making sure we understand how the NLP is working. And then in terms of long-term follow-up, that is definitely a challenge that we face is because of the continuity of care for patients and being able to track patients across different settings. So from hospital to clinic to pharmacy. So really being able to track the patient and making sure that we are understanding that patient journey. And then as well, really understanding the missingness that starts to come into play with longer term. So, there's the missingness that we know. So if we don't see age or sex or certain things that we would expect to see, we know that's missing. But then there's the missingness that we don't know. For example, if the data source is the data source capturing mortality, for example, or for certain outcomes that maybe are a little less severe. So these are all things that we run into with the longer term follow-up in our when we're discussing this with stakeholders. So I don't know, Amelia, if you have any other thoughts around any of those topics.
It's not uncommon. It, I think, is going to require definitely an openness discussion. And I think even in a traditional study, you're going to have loss to follow-up. And you account for that. And there are methods, statistical methods to help assess. I don't think that's any different with real world data. I think the point you make about the missing data and the missing data you don't know. I think there's always the question of what if patient was treated, let's say, at a different hospital for something, and that information wasn't relayed back to the health system in which you're partnered with following the data. That is definitely something we assess for and know is a possibility. Now, does that mean that the data that we get isn't valuable, right? Because of the possibility of missing data? No, the answer is no. I think, there's worthiness and still value in looking for signals in the data that you have. But it's part of it's a piece of the puzzle. With every study, there's, pros, there's strengths and weaknesses. And I think that that's a known weakness.
Yeah, yeah, and to what you said, yeah, just really having an understanding of what the strengths are, what the weaknesses are, and then, like you said, using those tools that we do have from, sensitivity analyses, and really, if you have a real deep understanding of the data, then you're able to apply those statistical techniques and really look at, different scenarios with the data to really, be able to describe that. So I think that's but just to add to what you said, that's yeah, definitely key in understanding that there's strengths and limitations in prospective studies as well and in clinical trials. So we just need to really understand the data and understand how we can address that with the tools that we have available to us.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Got another question here I think we've got some time for. You mentioned that clinician notes are anonymized and then you do an expert determination for the same. With these real-world data sets, is an IRB needed for a non-regulatory study? So this is a really good question. And I might start and then maybe Jill pass it back over to you. But the need for IRB review, I think, initially has less to do with the downstream recipient of the data, but is more to do with the methods of protection of the patient data for research purpose, whatever that research purpose might be. With the exception of certain types of studies that might be government funded, but it's our understanding and our experience that IRB review is needed, typically receiving IRB exemption, but just in order to make the data available. That is the case. The expert determination then helps to allow for, the export and the use of that data and how you make it available and the risk of, even if you're working with de-identified data sets, if you triangulate enough pieces, there's the potential to re-identify and the prevention of that. So I think maybe the answer I provided is a little muddy, but it's my understanding that there is IRB review in order to have access to that data. I don't know, Jill, do you have any
Yeah,
experience?
I don't have anything to add to what you've said. Yeah, I know. Um, it's, definitely want to take into consideration the project that you're working on and make sure, again, to really understand what, if with the data source, the type of patient privacy that, is being used, the expert determination, or this is a part of when we do our NESTcc data review, that's a key area where we dig into just to make sure we really understand what's been done or what might need to be done for a project. And, understanding that as much upfront, it also helps with what you had talked about, the
Yes.
timeline and, really the logistics. So, yeah.
Yes, and maybe just to follow up too, I think in our experience, well, each study doesn't necessarily have to undergo IRB review if the data is de-identified. So that might be a distinction. If you're working with identifiable data, definitely. There'll be the IRB review. If you're working with de-identified data, that's different story. That the study protocol wouldn't necessarily each individual study protocol with the same data set, but we still have IRB review overseeing the methods of de-identification in those places. All right, I know we're out of time. But I just wanted to thank you again, Jill, so much for your time and the work that you're doing at Nest. We have here our contact information. If attendees have any comments, please definitely reach out to myself at 3aware, Hufford at 3aware.ai. If you're interested in seeing a demo of the 3aware platform, please reach out to khouse at 3aware.ai. And then Nest, I think, Jill, again, thank you so much for your time. And yeah, I hope to talk with you in the future.
Yeah, thanks so much. Thanks, Amelia. Thanks, everyone. Have a good day.
Thank you,
Bye.
everyone.